Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. It is time for us to do a very long overdue non-beauty favorites. I have been jotting stuff down for the past few months of different things that I've just been really liking that I haven't really talked about really at all on the channel. So I thought we would go ahead and start. Fair warning, a lot of these things I'm gonna have to insert a picture of because I don't currently have them with me, but I am still very excited about them. We're gonna start by talking about movies and TV shows because it has been a wonderful past few months in regards to movies and TV shows. First thing I have is a movie that's actually now finally on DVD, which I'm so happy about. It is Thor Ragnarok. I don't talk a lot about my love of comic book movies on the channel, but my absolute favorite is Guardians of the Galaxy. That sense of humor is just right up my alley, and I don't read comic books. I read very few graphic novels. Don't read the Marvel comic books. I've tried and never really gotten into them, but I love the movie franchise. And Guardians of the Galaxy humor is very much alive and well in Thor Ragnarok. I've always liked the Thor movies. They're definitely my second favorite after Guardians of the Galaxy, but this one was just a pleasure to watch. I saw it twice in theaters, and both times, just the audience's reaction to it. I'm someone who unabashedly will laugh in movies, and I'm typically sometimes the only person laughing because it's not because they're not funny moments, but I'm just someone who's so in the moment. I absolutely love going to the movies. It's one of my favorite activities, hobbies. I'm really surprised I didn't start a book, TV, movie type of channel on YouTube because I love talking about all of those things, and I have such a wide variety of things that I watch movie-wise, TV-wise, and read. I'm really all over the place with my interests, but highly recommend this if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen any of the Thor movies, I'd naturally recommend that you watch the first two. This is the third in the series. I think it would be somewhat hard to fully follow the plot if you didn't see the other ones. Humor would still resonate with you though. So I definitely recommend it. It's probably going to go into my repertoire of movies that I always watch. I'm not joking. I probably watch the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, volume 1 and 2, probably once or twice a month. It's so frequent. They're to me just such having a bad day, put on that movie. Need to chill out, put on that movie. Just want to watch something brainless, put on that movie. This now will fall into that. It's just a really well done movie, lots of fun characters, and just all around good, clean fun. The next two things that I have are TV shows, and they are not good-natured fun. They are really dark. I really like true crime, and true crime is having a real moment in the podcast world, in the TV world. It's always been, classic TV shows, but it's really getting really dark. And so I've been watching on TNT, a channel that I don't normally tune into, to watch The Alienist, which is a limited series that they have put out. It's based on a book, which I haven't read, added it to my book summer reading list that I want to read this book. But essentially it's focused on New York City, and I want to say the 1900s, and it's focused on this, essentially a serial killer who's going around killing male child prostitutes. And these male child prostitutes are dressing up like girls. It's a very strange dynamic, but they're being killed very maliciously. And the police seem unable to figure out who is doing these murders, or they're covering it up. It's a little unclear. And at the same time, there's someone called an alienist, which in that time period, an alienist was basically a psychologist, someone who'd work with people who had mental disabilities and mental problems. And this alienist is trying to understand who the killer is personality-wise, what could be causing these triggers to want to murder, and try to solve the murder in that way. So you're seeing really different dynamics. It's a very dark show. It's got Dakota Fanning, who I like. It has two other male actors whose names I don't know, but I've watched quite a few movies and shows with them, and I like both of them as actors. One of them was Gaston in the most recent Beauty and the Beast that came out. So it's a really well done series, but it's definitely dark, and it's definitely graphic. I am not someone who does really well with up close violence or things that are gory, and it definitely toes a line with not being appropriate for television. I think it airs at like 10 o'clock or something, which is that weird time where you can kind of get away with a bit more graphic nature content, but it's really interesting. And the character development and the way that that progresses along with the crimes that are happening is really interesting. And so I definitely recommend it. I'm also someone who's not disturbed about the fact that it's a book and I haven't read the book yet. Sometimes I actually will watch a movie or a TV show first, knowing it's a book. And then as I'm watching it, I always kind of find myself being like, I bet I'm going to like the book even more because it probably will like develop these characters more or it will give more backstory. It doesn't necessarily ruin the book reading experience for me. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how it actually works as a book, but I'm enjoying the series. I think there are currently 8 episodes and I want to say it might be 10 or 12, but it's only going to be 1 season. So I'm a big fan of it and I'm enjoying it despite its really dark nature. Keeping in the same vein of very dark TV shows, I've also been watching the assassination of Gianni Versace, which I think is the most inaccurately named TV show, but I really like it because one, it's focused on a series of crimes, a serial killer that I knew nothing about, and I know it's gonna sound strange, I'm pretty well versed in serial killers. So I listened to a podcast which is focused literally on telling you about different serial killers, mostly in the United States, but all over the world throughout all different time periods. So it's really interesting to hear about, but I've not learned about this particular serial killer. His name is Andrew Cunanan, and it's based on actual events that happened in the 90s. And the way it's told, the story, the way it progresses, is actually really interesting because back in the fall, I read a book called Genuine Fraud, which is told in reverse order. It starts with what's supposed to be the last chapter of the book and moves backwards. And this TV show is told in the same manner. It starts with the killing of Gianni Versace, but there had actually been 4 or 5 other people that Andrew Cunanan had killed prior to killing in like a very short span of time prior to killing Gianni Versace. And so it starts with that and then it moves backwards. And you would think that that's somewhat confusing, and it is, because they don't always really clearly tell you that we're moving backwards in time. It took me like 2 or 3 episodes to fully figure that out. But what I like about it, which was the same thing for the book, when I read a book that was told in the same manner, is it really develops a person's character in a different way. Because rather than showing it the normal way, which would show you basically what led to like this person wanting to, act this way or do all these killings, it instead really helps you better understand how choices along the way can lead to different reactions. I don't know if I said that very clearly, but it's been helpful with looking at character development. I feel like it develops characters in a really interesting way. By fully immersing you into where they are at that dark place and then backing up, it just gives you a new way of looking at people, which I really like. So I'm enjoying the storytelling of that. Again, pretty dark. Some of it's hard to watch up close violence, especially because the main character, whose name I also don't know as an actor, was on Glee. And like, he was such like an uplifting person and a positive person and like just a great person to watch on Glee. So to see him play this really dark role is awesome. I'm happy to see that he's doing something like that. But it's so difficult to be like, wait, but you're supposed to be from Glee and you're supposed to be this really happy character who sings Katy Perry songs. So it is challenging to watch, but I've really been enjoying it. They've done an awesome job with all the limited series that they've done with this. They also did OJ versus the People. So that was a good one. Like, this is just, they've followed up really nicely. I'm enjoying this particular series. Definitely recommend you guys watching it. Okay, there are 2 podcasts that I have been loving that I want to share with you guys. The first is called Atlanta Monster. To be honest, I could probably do like multiple videos on podcasts that I love, but I'm just going to narrow it down to these 2. The first one is called Atlanta Monster. It is produced and voiced by the same person who brought us Up and Vanish, a whole different podcast. Up and Vanish was focused on a school teacher in small town Georgia who was abducted and killed, who basically went missing, and her murder, they assume it's a murder, has gone unsolved. And so this podcast looked into it. It had led to, in my opinion, the podcast led to some arrests and movement in the case, and now the case is currently awaiting a trial. But in the meantime, they came out with a new podcast focused on another crime in Georgia, which happened in the 80s, focused on a serial killing. They assume it's a serial killing, I should say, of a good number of young Black boys who were killed during this time. And the person who's sitting in jail for allegedly doing these crimes was convicted of doing 2 murders for adults. And if you know anything about serial killers, or based on typical profiles of serial killers, they don't typically break their victim pattern. So what that means is, like, if there's someone who's prone to killing white 20-year-old females, they don't typically stray from that type of person. They'll always kill white 20-year-old females. And so this case always brought a lot of controversy because technically the man who was convicted of it was never convicted of those separate child murders. And the Georgia Investigative Bureau, or GBI, whatever that stands for, wrapped those cases up as though they had been solved by convicting this man of 2 different murders. And so the premise is basically that Payne Lindsay, the person who is investigating and essentially narrating this investigation, has been focusing a lot on how there are a lot of people in Georgia who don't believe that this person ever committed any of these crimes, even the 2 murders they convicted him of. So it's really looking at just different sides of the story. They actually get to talk to the man who was convicted, who's sitting in jail right now, which sometimes you don't get to hear from those people. So it's been quite interesting. And it's really more just highlighting, as many of these podcasts do, just highlighting how the justice system, while designed with good intentions, doesn't always seem to uphold those good intentions and produce results that match the philosophy and purpose of the justice system. There are supposed to be 10 episodes, and I believe episode 8 has already aired. They had 1 bonus episode in there as well, but it's just been really interesting. For me, what I find so fascinating with a lot of stuff that happened in the 80s and 90s, and as far as murders go, is that there seems to be a lot that's just not known. And so it's so interesting to see how convicting people and how collecting of evidence has changed so much with the use of technology, and how I feel like it's a lot harder, I'd like to believe, it's a lot harder for people to actually commit these types of crimes in today's day and age. But it's just been really interesting. I don't think that there's a conclusive answer. They're probably not going to solve this. It's been great to see how the story has progressed and just to hear about the different aspects of the case that made it so controversial and so complicated, especially in Atlanta, Georgia in the 80s. The second podcast that I want to talk to you guys about that I think is really interesting is called Breakdown. This is a podcast that's actually being put out by a newspaper in Georgia that's a part of their reporters that they've placed on this podcast, and it's actually really interesting and successful. It's focused on crime, but not in the way that a lot of crime podcasts are focused. It's focused more on really teaching the audience about the justice system. I've learned so much from this particular podcast about, like, jury selection, about how defense lawyers versus prosecutors operate. It just really helps you understand our court system, which I know the very broad basics, but I'm fortunate enough to never have been a part of that or had to know a lot about the way it works. I've never been on a jury. I've never really been in a courtroom before. So it's just really cool in that sense. A lot of it might seem really dry and mundane, but I think it's important to know all of those details. There have been multiple seasons of Breakdown. It doesn't really go on a hiatus that often because there's always something to look at. Some of the more infamous cases that have been covered by this podcast in Georgia was a couple of years ago, there was a man who was convicted of malice murder for having left his child in the car, and the child actually died being left in the car all day. And malice murder means that he was convicted of intentionally doing this. So that was a very interesting case to listen to. Right now, the case that they're following, that they're actually doing episodes of, is about a man who's being charged with allegedly committing malice murder to kill his wife while they were driving in a car. And so, like, what I like about this podcast is they're not just cold cases. These are things that are happening in real time. And so literally the man who's reporting on it is going every single day to the trial, watching it, listening to it, and then putting together a weekly episode of what happened that week. So like I said, it's been very educational. If you're someone who's curious about the court system and the way it works, I think we're on our 5th season, so it's the 5th case that they've covered. I've listened to 3 of them entirely. There's one that I haven't quite listened to yet, but I really like listening to podcasts. I listen to them in the car mostly. I'm not someone who can run or work out listening to podcasts. I don't find them to be like super motivational for me, but they hold my attention in ways that I'm not normally able to be held by audio, aside from music. So if you're someone who's looking to do more than just listen to the radio, or if you have a longer commute, I'd recommend either one of those two podcasts. And if you guys want me to do a whole video on podcasts, I 100% would be happy to do so, because there are a lot of podcasts I listen to, and all of them I think are really worthwhile and well done, and what I would absolutely recommend. Next up, I have 2 books that I recently read over a February break that I was just captivated by. I always seem to, once like November, December hits, I start to be able to do free reading again, and I'm not as consumed by school stuff, and I absolutely love to free read. There's so many books I love to just read. And the 2 books that I read during February break, one was a memoir, which I really don't very often read. I'm not super into memoirs, but it was called As You Wish. I feel like this is one that's pretty well known. It's written by Carrie Hughes, I think is his last name, who was the dark pirate Roberts in the movie Princess Bride. And he wrote basically a whole memoir about his experience being in that movie and what it was like to make it and different trials and tribulations of being in it. They also have in the book other snippets and commentary from the different actors and actresses and producers and directors who were all a part of it. I really love The Princess Bride, but I have an even deeper appreciation of it now that I've gotten to hear from someone who was such a heavy part of the actual movie. It was really interesting and really captivating. I also didn't know this, so forgive me if you're a big Princess Bride fan, but it's based on a book. I never knew The Princess Bride was a book, so I've obviously requested to read that from the library, but it was just one of those really easy, enjoyable books, and I would just definitely recommend it if you're looking for something, if you're a Princess Bride fan, if you're someone who likes to read memoirs. It's pretty interesting, so that was a really good one. But then, like, on the opposite flip side of that, I read a young adult book called Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda. This is actually becoming a movie. It's called Love, Simon. It comes out, I want to say March 16th, and I love the male actor who's playing Simon in that. Again, I don't know his name. Common theme, I don't typically learn actors and actresses' names. I just like cult follow them in every other aspect. But he was on a TV show with Melissa Joan Hart, and he was a really good actor in that. So I followed a lot of his work. He was in Everything, and now he's in this, and I'm just looking forward to it. So I picked the book up, and what I liked about it was that it's focused on, the premise of it is, it's about a teenage boy who is about 17 years old, and he is gay, but he hasn't told anyone in his life. He's not intentionally hiding it. He's not afraid of talking about it. It's just one of those things where he hasn't felt ready to declare this, and he's also kind of struggled with the idea of why. Why do I have to declare that I'm gay? Like, you don't have to declare that you're straight. So it's an interesting take, but what adds a different layer to it is that he started to actually communicate with another person at his school who is also gay but has not also come out. So they don't know who each other is because they're both using pen names with each other, but it was really interesting to see how the story developed, because right in the first chapter, one other student happens to go on Simon's computer at school after he steps away. Simon forgot to log out, and that student reads these emails and sees that 1, Simon's gay, and 2, he's talking to somebody else at school who is also gay. And so he actually starts to blackmail Simon. And it's just really interesting, like, coming of age, you know, struggle of, you know, being a teenager, which sounds super cliche, but the way it's told, I mean, the emotion came off the pages. I read that book in about 1.5 days, and I never read books that aggressively and that quickly, but it just sucked me in, and I was so captivated, and the writing of it was just so genuine, and I'm really hoping that those types of things translate into the movie. I feel like they will, but it was just such a really interesting book, and it was told from a point of view that I don't think there's enough of, especially in the young adult literature world. So I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it, even if you're not someone who likes young adult literature. I think there are a lot of things in there that you could still appreciate and enjoy, so I would definitely recommend it. The last thing that I have is a soundtrack. It is surprisingly a musical. I'm not the biggest fan of musicals, but I have been in love with The Greatest Showman soundtrack since I saw the movie back in December. I really like Zac Efron. I know his start into the movie industry was on Disney Channel and whatever, but his voice, he really can sing. And there are some wonderful actresses whose names I do not know who also have these beautiful voices, and the soundtrack is just so powerful. There's a good mix of like get up and dance songs, a good mix of just these lovely ballads. I just am not sick of it. It's a soundtrack that, interestingly, I can work out to. It's a soundtrack that I can like listen to in the car and belt out all the words. I just really like it. And normally in musicals, I typically find like a few songs that I like, but a lot of them I end up like skipping over, or I don't buy the whole soundtrack. But from top to bottom, I really, really like the soundtrack. So all in all, even if you haven't seen the movie, I'd recommend checking out the soundtrack because it is just a really awesome soundtrack. Like, it just is all around good. All right, guys, that's it for me. I know a lot of really random things, but if you check any of these things out, if you yourself have listened to, read, or watched any of the things that I mentioned, let me know in the comments below. And if you have any recommendations based on the things that you've heard me say I like, let me know that down below in the comments, and I will talk to you guys in my next video real soon. Bye.